Hey, good morning. Before I get started, thanks, Cindy, for bringing up the global climate crisis marches. They're happening around the world. What an amazing thing. What an amazing thing for young people to say, to have a voice, I suppose. And what's that line in the Bible? Out of the mouth of babes. Yeah. We hear that, we think, oh, that's cute, but that's not true. No, it is true. And I like the idea, I'm drawn to the idea that young people are speaking up and speaking up for their future and for the future of their own kids, yet unborn. That's the kind of wisdom we need, the wisdom of 7 generations from now. And hearing from beings and beings yet born into the world. And I'm saying that in part as a little advertisement, because tonight, if you look on your little yellow sheet, we have a chance to do a ritual at Pam and Jean's place, and the details are in the yellow sheet. Don't read it now, I see you all reading it. But we invite you, we need you to sign up. We're going to have a council of all beings, which is an opportunity to, in a sacred ritual, to lend voice to the others, other than human ones, that are part of our interconnected and interrelated world. And you might be thinking, yeah, but it might rain. It's going to happen rain or shine. Right? We can do it indoors as well. So I wanted to offer that because it's a way of participating, I think, in the shifting consciousness of the world. That's what we hope for, and that's also what's already happening. You've heard me say it a dozen times now. No problem can be solved by the same consciousness that created it. That's Einstein. And what we can do is begin to submit ourselves to our own shifting consciousness and to be agents of consciousness shifting activities, like giving voice to future generations who are at present voiceless. They have no voice. And also helping to give voice in a creative and imaginative way to the other beings who cannot speak to the suffering of the climate, or are speaking but in a language we don't recognize, we might say. So anyway, that's coming tonight. So that was just a little bit of an advertisement, although not unrelated to today's topic, which is well-being. Don't you want to have some well-being in your life? Yes. Could you use more of it? I think so. And wouldn't you like to see not only other fellow human beings enjoy increased well-being, but the natural world as well? Would you like that? So let's talk about well-being. So this is really well-being part 2. Something of a series title is emerging now for the next 6 months. And I'm calling it Ancient Virtues and Modern Values. I want to look again at our values, the 6 or so values that have emerged up out of this community over time and been honed and shaped. Let's look at them again. Let's talk about them. I love values because values are different in my mind than just beliefs. I'm actually not asking you to believe any of these values. What would that mean? I believe in well-being. Okay, good for you. The question is, how can that value shape us, challenge us, hone us, inspire us, spur us on? How can we put the value into practice, not whether or not we hold it as kind of a mental construct? Have I made sense? So let's talk about values. And I guess it's part of my own unique way of looking at things, and maybe even something of my own calling. I like to look back to see where some of these things come from, what I would call the wisdom tradition. And hence the title, Ancient Virtues, Modern Values. Aristotle is the one that gave us really the language of virtues, and even of the good life, which is in our mission statement. That's what Aristotle was about. What is the good life? And at the very centerpiece of Aristotle was well-being. I already told you this. Eudaimonia, it's called in Greek. Sometimes it gets translated as happiness, but that's a weak translation. Actually, it's a fine translation. It's just our modern assumptions about happiness color it. We think he might be saying something like the meaning of life is just to like feel good about stuff and like own nice things and just generally be happy. No, well-being already sounds vastly different, correct? So I'm just trying to have a conversation. Where have we been? Where are we going? How can we continue to listen to the wisdom tradition? What needs to be carried forward and what doesn't? Maybe that's the job of an elder. And I see many of you as elders. And I mean that like in the most beautiful, symbolic, archetypal sense, not just that you're older than me, which some of you are. But part of what the elder does is carry the tradition forward and speak about it to the next generation. And also does a little bit of sifting. Lets the chaff blow away. The wind blows the chaff away from the wheat. Did I get it? Yes. That's part of the sifting. So anyway, it's important to say, where have we been? And where are we going? And what needs to blow away? And what needs to be maintained? So that's a bit of the ancient virtues, modern values. So this is part 2 of well-being. So I wanted to read you the way our value reads at C3. It says, we promote wholeness and wellness of mind, body, and spirit. It's a pretty good start. We promote wholeness and wellness of mind, body, and spirit, recognizing our self-responsibility, our interrelatedness, and interdependence. That's a lot in one sentence. I'll just read it one more time. We promote wholeness and wellness of mind, body, spirit, recognizing our self-responsibility. We got to do something about this. Our interrelatedness, we can't do it alone. And our interdependence, we're all intricately related anyway. That's a value of ours. And I read that and I resonate with it. I say, yep, that's what I would like to be a part of such a community that's committed to wholeness and wellness of mind, body, and spirit. And is taking responsibility and recognizing our interconnectedness. That sounds good. So let's mull on that a bit this morning. Let's turn that over. Well, how? How do we do such a thing? How do we approach such a thing? We don't just want to put it on a t-shirt. How boring, you know? Well, I did that because it's on my t-shirt, you know? No, that doesn't really work. So that's a bit of where we're going today. All right, so a story about well-being and happiness. So when I first became a pastor at an evangelical church, the phone rang and someone on the other line had called me who was a prominent person in the church community. And I hadn't talked to this person before, and they had done a lot for the church community in terms of finances and some other things. So they were like a prominent person. And they said, what are you doing right now? I said, well, I'm just in my office studying. He's like, I want to take you out to lunch. I said, okay, fine. So 2 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. He was there. So I don't think it was really an option. But anyway, we went out to lunch, and we went to Five Guys, burgers and fries. And we were eating lunch. We started eating lunch. And then he asked me a question right from the beginning, which I thought was an interesting question. He said, do you think God wants us to be happy? And I felt uneasy about the question. But I was also like new at the job, and I really didn't, I was like, so I just said yes, because I could tell that's what he wanted to hear. Because no would be a weird answer anyway. No. Okay. So I just said yes. I said, yeah, I guess so. And he's like, good, because I've had other pastors that don't agree with me on this. So I guess I passed the test of God wanting us to be happy. But the question bothered me more after the conversation than in the moment. Because the conversation went on from there, and we talked about a variety of things, but it stuck like with me. And it's also a question that Aristotle is getting at, meaning well-being. you could ask it more directly, what is happiness and where does it come from? And do you have any say in it? Does it come from God or the gods? Does it come from circumstances? It's actually a very kind of sophisticated, kind of came out in a simple way, but sophisticated and complex philosophical problem beneath, do you think God wants us to be happy? And by the way, I took from our conversation, happiness, examples of happiness were financial security and possessions and general health. That was kind of the way I was taking it. So, not this morning, but this week I came up with, 5 or so answers or possibilities that are related to this question. Do you think God wants us to be happy? So here's one assumption behind the question. It could be the case that God creates circumstantial happiness. Just does it, like a puppet master, right? It's a possibility. You don't know that for sure. Probably if you're in this room, you think that's unlikely. But it's a possible answer, okay? Boom. And that kind of answer means that God is somewhat arbitrary. Because not everybody is that happy, right? So if it's a mechanistic world we live in and God says, happiness over here, I don't really feel like it over here. Bit of an arbitrary world. Not impossible, though. It's worth mulling over. So here's another possibility related. If we do the right thing, then God makes us happy. Now, that is, you might say, I don't agree with that, but a lot of people live like that, and there may be a time that you've lived like that, correct? If I do the right thing, good things are going to happen to me, and maybe God's going to do that for me. Now, it's not the case that is 100% false. Worldviews are more complex than that. Have you ever tried to do something, put in the effort, and then good things have returned to you? Of course, okay? So now just extend that out to the concept of God or the divine, and of course it's a bit theologically problematic. Here's another possibility. If you're not happy, God's doing that to you because you didn't please him or her, probably him, in the right way. Correct? I'm not happy because I didn't do the right thing, and essentially God is punishing me. Also a possible conclusion, just swirling around this question of does God want us to be happy? You might be wondering, why are you talking on and on about this? You'll see. Now, the problem with that, actually, the Bible itself takes issue with. That's the book of Job. The book of Job is a bone in the throat for this kind of stuff because Job is a good person doing the right things, just out there being a person. And then, whatever, in the story, in the myth, Satan starts messing with him and all kinds of things go wrong, and he's a good person. So actually, the Bible, interestingly enough, wants to challenge some of these basic assumptions. Anyway, that's a whole nother talk. D, this is my fourth point along this. Here's another possibility. God is not involved. Okay, God is not involved. And, here's the conjunction, happiness is kind of like a fortune cookie. All right? Don't you like a good fortune cookie? I love the ones that are misspelled. Those are my personal favorite ones. But, possible conclusion, God's not involved. So then where does happiness come from? Well, it's kind of like a fortune cookie. You crack that baby open, you see what's in there. You don't know. It's random, in other words. Does that feel right? Maybe it's not about getting it right. Anyway, we're just probing, we're just probing here. And then point 5 here is what Aristotle said. Okay? Aristotle said, the gods are not involved in human affairs. That is a radical thing to say in 2,300 years ago. The gods are not involved in human affairs. In other words, they're not manipulating circumstances. It's not a mechanistic sky god, according to Aristotle. So kind of a radical thought at the time. He's not an atheist. Some people kind of read Aristotle as like the first atheist. I don't think so. I think that's completely unfair. But he's definitely not a theist, we could say. He's not an atheist, but he's not a theist exactly. Anyway, he says the gods are not involved, and happiness is a matter, I'm going to get it right, of habit choice, and a little luck. Habit, choice, you have a say in the matter, and also luck is involved. Sometimes you crack the fortune cookie open. Because you know that to be true, right? You could be going about your life just doing the right things, and there's a tragedy. There's you get sick, and it's not because of any lifestyle choices that you were making. That's true, correct? So sometimes it's like a fortune cookie, and you have choice. He gets out of it by saying both. That happiness is about our action, our will, our choices, and also luck is involved. So let's embrace the ambiguity. And he's also saying to the Greek theologians, don't blame the gods. Don't blame the gods. Now, to what extent, if you believe in God, the divine is involved it's a theological question. What do we mean by the divine? What do we mean by God? I'm not going to take that one up today, all right? Another time, we'll talk about that. But just to keep it in the realm of Aristotle, when it comes to well-being, he's saying a little luck is involved and human choice is involved. So, and we just hold the tensions of that. He also says, which is why courage, by the way, is one of his virtues. He said, the courageous person is the one that says, no matter what happens to me, even if it's by chance, I'm going to try to make the effort of walking toward the good life and well-being anyway. He says that requires tremendous courage. Would you agree with that? Me too. Okay, so back to mind, body, spirit. This is the thing that I want to kind of camp out in today. We promote wholeness and wellness of mind, body, and spirit. First of all, that is in and of itself a holistic way of looking at well-being. Correct? That's not a siloed way of looking at things. It's interconnected and interrelated. You are all three, mind, body, spirit. Now, you might throw in a couple of other words and change them a little bit. It doesn't matter. It's still a holistic image. That well-being is about all three, we'll say. Body, mind, spirit. In fact, one of my favorite sort of talks, I'm big time into Ken Wilber, as you can tell from my ridiculous quote that I put in there, which I'll talk about in a second. I was listening to a lecture of his, and this woman was saying that she was having a hard time getting up to master level meditation, where she was able to meditate 5 or 6 hours at a time in one sitting. And she felt like she was, as I'm sure you were last week, having a hard time getting there. But anyway, she was saying that something like, I'm paraphrasing, I don't seem to be able to quite reach the level of enlightenment that's possible that I see in the other masters. What's wrong with me? How can I get to that? And you know what Ken Wilber said? He said, have you tried going for a run? Okay? So that's mind, body, spirit. That's saying, okay, meditation is important, but clearly this is a hook and an obsession. And what about the rest of your life? What's your relationship like with your health, your exercise, your diet? Anyway, that's part of, I think, the invitation, even of the 21st century, that we can no longer live in such a siloed world. Such a siloed approach. And you think, well, we're not, because modern science is saying it's all related. But most of the time, if you're honest, we're drawn into a siloed approach to things. I'll give you an example. Watch commercials for medicines, which is another way of saying watch commercials. Essentially, there's a pill for everything, correct? And I'm not against modern medicine at all. I'm not. I think it's a wild, unbelievable gift that has made the world healthier than at any point in human history, and that is a fact. In terms of infant mortality, in terms of disease, it has changed the world for the better. However, it also can lead to the pill approach for everything. I have this particular ailment. What I need to do is take a pill for it instead of ask questions of mind, body, spirit. Holistic approach. What are you eating? What do you do when you get up in the morning? I know a therapist who, in the first sessions, likes to say something like this. After, What brings you in? And then there's like the vomiting, this. He'll sometimes ask, what did you have for breakfast? See, that's a very interesting question. Wouldn't you agree? What is your daily, how do you treat yourself in the morning when you get up? That's pretty interesting. That's mind, body, spirit. That's moving toward the holistic direction. So, here's a little Merton quote. I love this. This is one of my favorite Merton passages of all time. It's a little bit longer, but I'll just give you the short version. Keep your eyes clean, and your ears quiet, and your mind serene. Breathe in God's air. Work, if you can, under God's sky. But if you have to live in a city and live among machines and ride the subways and eat in a place where the radio makes you deaf with spurious news and where the food destroys your life and the sentiments of those around you poison your heart with boredom, he says, do not be impatient, but accept it as the love of God and as a seed of solitude planted in your own soul. Now, why am I sharing that? Because I hear behind that a much more holistic invitation. Do you find yourself living in the city with poisoned food and boring conversation? And yes, part of modern life is like that. And in a holistic way, what is he saying we need? Don't forget, breathe in the air. Go outside. Quiet the mind instead of the machine of spurious news and tweets and this, because that can suck up all the energy. So again, Thomas Merton, in his own way, but he's really speaking more of spirit here, mind, but he's connecting them. So my oldest daughter left for Southeast Asia. She graduated from high school and is doing a gap semester in Southeast Asia. She'll be gone until December. And when she left, I was feeling a mixture of things, which I won't go into tremendous detail, but enough detail as happy for her and also sad. That sort of strange feeling you get. It's like a grief, but also a joy sort of mixed up together. Anyway, what was my point with bringing this up? I was feeling low after this. And I was starting to watch TV, which I get I don't have cable, but I have this little thing that sticks on the wall that gets channels. But whenever the wind blows, I only get 2. So that was making things worse. The wind was blowing and I was only getting 2 channels and I didn't like either one. So I just, for some reason, not without thinking of Thomas Merton, I didn't think of Thomas Merton do this, but I just went outside because I had some digging to do. I was running a water line. I was like, I'll just dig for a while. And guess what? After an hour, I felt great. I didn't think good thoughts. I didn't pray. I didn't practice meditation and letting go and just, I just dug a hole. That's all I did. I breathed in the air. I worked, if I could, outside, and I felt a whole lot better. That is actually practicing wholeness of mind, body, spirit. I just needed to get the energy out. It's like when an animal gets chased and they survive, and afterwards they just shake. It's that energy coming out. You don't say, hey, just let it go, zebra, in meditation. Just take a deep breath and, no. You have to get it out in the body. Which is why I wanted to put in this extremely ridiculous quotation from Ken Wilber, that we need a GP of the spirit. He's saying we no longer can live with the luxury of only these siloed approaches to everything. We need general practitioners, not specialists, but a general practitioner. He's talking about a kind of spiritual therapist that he's making up, but that can speak to nutrition, aerobics, I like that he says aerobics for some reason. Aerobics, weightlifting, centering prayer, transcendental meditation, but just saying all of these tools are a part of a holistic life. Not that you have to do them all, but how are you uniquely constituted? How are you taking care of your body? How are you taking care of your mind? How are you taking care of your spirit? All these things matter. Let's talk about these things instead of just that one approach. And if you're having significant trouble, the spiritual practitioner, the general practitioner, will refer you. Well, you should go on a Zen meditation retreat to take this one thing further. I think it's a fantastic idea. Of course, he says nobody takes him seriously, but I do. I just have no power. Okay, so what else might I say? And then I want to talk about mind, body, spirit, just very briefly, just touch upon it. So the other invitation comes straight from the Greek world. And maybe you know this, but there are two temples that we know of that had this inscribed on the front of them. One was the temple to Apollo. So Apollo is the god of light. And one other thing I can't think of. Doesn't matter. Seems like they're the god of like 5 things always. Anyway, light. And then the oracle at Delphi. So this is a woman that you would go see. I've been there. It's very amazing. It's way high in the mountains. But anyway, here's the inscription. Know thyself. Okay, you've heard this? Okay, also the church fathers use this too. Know thyself. St. Anthony is famous for saying it as well. St. Anthony was a desert father, and people would go out to see him, and they would say, what do we need to do? First, to be connected to the divine. He would say, know thyself. Just quoting what everybody knew, really. So this mind, body, spirit invitation, wholeness and wellness of mind, body, spirit, requires some self-examination. You can't get out of that part of it. If you want a more holistic approach to mind, body, spirit, it requires some self-examination. Know thyself. It's 2,300 years old. And it's hard to know yourself. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, think about, I'm not against online dating, all right? I have friends that have found their lifelong matches on the internet. But do you think that really is a description of the person you're going to be sitting across from? Do you think you really have even gotten close to the truth of your own life by answering those questions? Hell no! You're just scratching the surface. I mean, Carl Jung says, you are a mystery to yourself in the first place. So, know thyself is a lifelong thing. Okay, it's a lifelong activity. And in what respect? Mind, body, spirit. What's your body like? How are you made up? What are your tastes? What are you allergic to? You know? What about your mind? The way it works, the way you think or not think. What are you drawn to? What are you curious about? What are you good at? What are you not good at? Can you develop these things? Body and mind. What about spirit? How well do you know yourself? What is your spiritual practice? Do you have one? Or is that not language that you're comfortable with? And if you're not comfortable with it, how would you put it? How would you put the spirit? If you really did some self-examination, know thyself, what is my spiritual practice? What would you say? Could you write that out? Could you explain it to someone? Not that you need to. These actually, it's hard work. And it's built into really good programs like the 12-step program. A searching moral inventory. Do you really want to do that? Most people are like, nah. How about just like a mild inventory? Like a searching surface inventory. I'm okay with that. But in a holistic sense, a searching moral inventory, I made up other ones. I put them down in my notes. A searching emotional inventory, you know? Whatever, you fill in the blank. As a whole being, here you are. See, a holistic approach, Leslie said something amazing in our 9 o'clock. She said, we are already whole. You are already a whole being, mind, body, spirit. How well do you know, she didn't say this, so I'm adding it. How well do you know this whole thing? And part of the invitation, I think, of growing up and growing into more wellness and wholeness and growing into a life of happiness or well-being, and that happiness and well-being extending beyond yourself to the broader world requires some self-examination. And I probably should have mentioned this at the beginning, but just like I think Aristotle is saying both to the question of chance and choice, he's also saying both to the question of the individual and the communal. I already told you this. His definition of the idiot is someone who doesn't participate in the polis, the city. So other people's well-being and personal well-being, two sides of the same coin to him, just as a reminder of something I said before. All right, and I just want to give you some questions with body, mind, spirit. How well do you know your own body? How well do you know your own body? What needs work? Or do you get to a certain point and you're like, I'm done? Okay. Now, you might be done with certain programs, but how well do you know your own body? It's a good question. And it's directly related to your well-being. You know, I'm a bit of an idiot myself, not in the Aristotelian sense, but just in the general sense of an idiot. And so in June, I did a half Ironman, which is kind of far. My son reminds me it was only a half. Okay, it was only a half Ironman. It felt hard. So, and I also did it on what I called the minimalist training plan, which was I want to train to finish. But what was amazing to me, and this is the first time I experienced this directly. So you swim a mile, 1.2 miles, and then you bike 56 miles, and then you run a half marathon, 13 miles. And I had never run that far anyway, even before the race. So like I said, minimalist training plan. But what happened to me is that when I was in the run, I could feel my body like shutting down and needing food, nutrients. And how did I know that? Because my body was saying, you need nutrients and you're going to die, okay? So I would take these little gels that I had them with me, but you can get them on the run also, or pretzels. At one point I ate pretzels, and I could feel it working within a matter of minutes. It was a very strange, like I'd never experienced it that directly. Like I cannot take another step, and I can feel my body digesting this, and then I get a little boost of energy. I could feel it, and it was a very strange thing. So I don't know really why I told you that, other than how well do you know your body? What does it need? What does it not need? What do you take in that actually doesn't serve you very well? What do you take in that does serve you well? I can't answer these questions for you, but this is part of the invitation of a holistic approach to well-being, to the good life. How well do you know your own body? What needs work? We also know something amazing about the human body in general. If you push it, it responds. We don't know why. It gets stronger by pushing it. You think it would be the opposite. You think, hey, just chill. You'll just get healthier. But for some reason, we don't know why, that's the way it works. So you have to talk about your limits. What are my limits? What are my limitations even? And how do I push against those? Part of the mind, body, spirit conversation. Okay, let's talk about the mind. How does your mind work? By the way, mind, body, of course, is related. I just read a statistic that vigorous exercise can improve your brain health by making your brain 20 years younger. Not 2 years younger, 20 years younger. Vigorous exercise. Again, holistic approach. Now, I don't know exactly what they mean by vigorous, like this thing. What do they call that? Aerobics? Like, remember that in like the 80s? That's it. That's what I'm here to promote. I actually have a booth out back. You can sign up. But how do you think? Do you think well? Do you challenge your mind? Do you read things? Would you say to yourself, my goal by the end of the year is to learn 10 new things? That's a lot, actually. What we like to do is read 10 things that confirm the 10 things we already know. Then we feel good about ourselves, but we get dumber. Seriously, what would you like to learn? What are you drawn to? Are you humble enough, I'm talking to myself, to say, I'm going to read something I don't agree with, or I'm going to think hard about something? I remember when I first started teaching high school, I had to teach ethics, which I thought, oh, this would be fun. And I really did enjoy it. But I was having trouble talking about what an argument was, because I don't know if you've been around high school students, but they're actually, I was going to criticize high school students, but I just thought adults are worse. Arguments aren't really arguments. They're just feelings. Well, I feel like this is the truth. Okay, fine. So I was having trouble talking about what's an argument. You have to talk about arguments when you're talking about ethics and moral choices and so forth. So I called my friend who's a philosopher at ASU. And he gave me some techniques to talk about it. But it was interesting to me that very basic argumentation, premise 1, premise 2, and conclusion, I had to write out. And I realized I'm writing this out for myself. And I'm trying to teach my kids. Let's take apart the argument. What is the premise? What's the second premise? What's the conclusion? If premise 1 is true and premise 2 is true, the conclusion has to be true. This is logic 101. Really. How many of us fail to do that very simple thing? What are people saying? What's the premise? If you want to challenge the argument, you challenge the premise, not the conclusion. I don't know why I'm giving you all this stuff, but I remember writing it on the board thinking, this is helping me. I'm thinking. It's a miracle. But also with students, it freed the students up from just saying, well, I feel like this. What's the premise? You want to attack somebody's conclusion? Attack the premise. And then all of a sudden, I felt like we were learning to think in class. Anyway, do you think? Do you think about arguments? These are all ways of, I think, mind, body, spirit. And so I guess my thoughts about spirit, because I see my time is running out here. So let me just say a few things about spirit here. So my definition of spirit is something like this: finding connection to the sacred or the transcendent. Finding a connection, a relationship, or a connection with the transcendent. That's how my Kent Dobson's definition of having the spirit connection, mind, body, spirit. So, what is it? Do you have a connection to the transcendent, to the big, to the mystery, to the sacred? Whether you think about that as God or some other expression of the mystery. And what is that? James Finley, he's got this great line: find your practice and practice, find your teacher and follow, find your community and enter. The first part of this, find your practice and practice, it's not very specific. Find your practice and practice it. That's the way to cultivate a relationship with the Spirit. And I think that's what the great wisdom traditions across the religions have always taught. That connection to the divine is not something that you can manufacture. It's not 1 + 1 = 2, well, I prayed for 5 minutes and that means, therefore, it doesn't work like that, but a practice over time, I'm using modern language, softens the ego, helps the ego take a back seat, so that the possibility of connection with the one, the spirit, the transcendent, the numinous, the all, becomes a little more possible. But what they have in common is you need a practice. So find one. And it doesn't have to be a fancy one. My practice, if you were to ask me, what's your practice? I'd say, occasionally I take walks in the woods. And I'm not even that good at it. But that's my practice. If someone said, do you pray? I walk around, I might say. That's what I do. I walk around. And it helps soften. It works on my ego over time. It helps soften a sense of who I am and my connection to the mystery, or to what I would call the divine. It doesn't mean every time I go out, I levitate, have some sort of mystical encounter. But every once in a while, it feels like the barriers between the sacred and the ordinary are very blurry. Something like that. So find your practice and practice. What is your practice? So here are my questions. I'll just review them. How well do you know your own body? What are you currently doing to challenge your mind? And what's your practice? How do you stay connected in your own way to spirit, however you might define spirit. I love that about the 12-step program. I have to get it right. Submit to God however you understand God. Is that it? Did I get it? The higher power, sorry. The higher power, however you might understand the higher power. I just met with a Buddhist friend of mine who also does a 12-step. He's a former addict. And he's figured out a way to say the same thing without higher power. But however you might define it. Because practice matters. Part of that holistic approach. That's all I got for you today. Thanks.